Book nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. Pamela Harriman's life was a testament to the curious alchemy of charm, intelligence, timing, and ambition. From her beginnings as the daughter of an English aristocrat with ancient roots but modest means, to her final role as one of the most influential women in American politics, she embodied the paradox of someone who never held elected office, yet shaped the destinies of those who did. Christopher Ogden's Kingmaker paints a portrait of Pamela not as a passive socialite, but as a woman who mastered the art of presence, who recognized the invisible levers of influence, and who, through seduction both literal and metaphorical, positioned herself at the center of power across continents and decades. To read her story is to step into a world of drawing rooms, war rooms, bedrooms, and diplomatic salons where politics, intimacy, and strategy blurred into a single performance, and where Pamela proved a master choreographer. She was born Pamela Beryl Digby in 1920, the daughter of Lord Digby, a Dorset aristocrat whose family seat, Minturn House, carried more history than fortune. Her early years were marked by the duality of privilege and limitation. She had the breeding and connections of the British upper class, but lacked the wealth that lubricated full participation in its pleasures. This scarcity sharpened her instincts. She learned early that attention and charm could compensate for money, that listening intently could make others feel important, and that in circles of power, presence was a currency. She was sent to finishing school in Switzerland, trained in languages and social graces, and prepared, like many women of her station, for a life in which marriage was a career. But unlike many, Pamela would turn that expectation into a lifelong theater of strategy. Her first great act on the public stage came during World War II, when at age 21 she married Randolph Churchill, the only son of Winston Churchill. It was not a love match in the truest sense, but an alliance of mutual convenience and promise. Randolph was mercurial, brilliant in flashes, but deeply irresponsible and addicted to gambling and drink. Yet marriage to him placed Pamela within the orbit of Winston himself, the man who would become Britain's wartime prime minister and a titan of the 20th century. Living at Chartwell and later at Downing Street, Pamela observed power in its most concentrated form. She saw how Winston commanded loyalty, how he used words as weapons, how he relied on the women around him, his wife Clementine, his secretaries, his daughter-in-law, to shore up his vulnerabilities. Pamela absorbed these lessons, and though her marriage to Randolph was stormy and short-lived, producing a son, Winston Churchill's grandson, it gave her an enduring surname and an apprenticeship in the theater of politics. After her separation from Randolph, Pamela began to navigate life as an independent woman in war-torn London. She became known as one of the glamour girls, women who lifted spirits during bleak times with their beauty, wit, and company. But Pamela's companions were not ordinary soldiers. They were generals, diplomats, and rising stars. She had affairs with Averell Harriman, the wealthy American envoy who was already decades older than her, and with Edward R. Murrow, the legendary journalist. In each relationship, she practiced what would become her lifelong skill. She listened, she remembered details, she offered warmth without judgment. Men confided in her not simply because she was attractive, but because she made them feel amplified, seen. Her apartments became salons where ideas flowed as freely as champagne, and where alliances formed under the cover of intimacy. Her post-war years cemented her reputation as one of Europe's most alluring hostesses. She lived in Paris for stretches, where her lovers included the likes of Gianni Agnelli, the Fiat magnate whose elegance and charisma matched her own. Agnelli's presence in her life showed Pamela's ability to adapt her persona. With him, she was glamorous, continental, chic, a woman of art and couture. Later, she was linked romantically to Ellie de Rothschild, to the actor Kirk Douglas, and even rumored connections to princes and political leaders. Always, she remained more than a mistress. She became a confidant, an advisor, someone who could be trusted with secrets. Her apartments became hubs where businessmen, politicians, and artists mingled, and where Pamela's influence resided not in titles, but in networks. The turning point in her life came in the 1970s when she rekindled her relationship with Averell Harriman. Harriman, by then in his 80s, had lived a life of staggering wealth and accomplishment. He was heir to the Union Pacific fortune, had served as Roosevelt's ambassador to the Soviet Union, had governed New York, and had been a presidential candidate. Harriman was lonely and vulnerable, and Pamela stepped into his life not only as a companion, but as a strategist. She married him in 1971, becoming Pamela Harriman, and with that union, she transformed her social capital into overt political capital. Harriman's Georgetown townhouse became one of the most coveted invitations in Washington, a salon where senators, cabinet members, journalists, and foreign dignitaries gathered. Pamela orchestrated the guest lists with precision, seating enemies together to spark dialogue, pairing rising stars with established players, always with an eye to influence. What separated Pamela from other hostesses was intentionality. She was not content to preside over glittering dinners for their own sake. She used them to shape outcomes. She supported Democratic candidates, raised funds, and became an indispensable part of the party's machinery. Her parties financed campaigns, soothed rivalries, and introduced donors to politicians in need of backing. One of her greatest triumphs came in her relationship with Bill Clinton, whom she identified early as a rising star. She championed him, raised money for him, and provided the networks that would propel his candidacy. When he won the presidency in 1992, it was in no small part thanks to the infrastructure Pamela had nurtured. Clinton rewarded her by appointing her U.S. ambassador to France in 1993, a remarkable capstone to her career. Her ambassadorship in Paris was more than ceremonial. She understood diplomacy as she understood social life. Relationships were everything. She cultivated ties with French leaders, charmed intellectuals, and represented American interests with poise. It was a natural role for a woman who had spent her life translating between cultures, soothing egos, and amplifying voices. Tragically, her tenure was cut short when she died suddenly in 1997 of a cerebral hemorrhage, collapsing at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. She was 76. Her funeral drew dignitaries from across the globe, a testament to the reach of her influence. What Ogden's portrait makes clear is that Pamela Harriman was never simply a socialite, never merely a beautiful woman who passed through powerful lives. She was instead a practitioner of what might be called the politics of presence. She understood that in politics, as in art, the setting often shapes the performance. By hosting dinners, by listening carefully, by making people feel significant, she created spaces where decisions could be gestated and alliances sealed. This was her genius. She was a kingmaker, not by holding the scepter herself, but by orchestrating the room where the scepter was chosen. Throughout the book, Ogden does not shy away from the criticisms leveled at Pamela. Some saw her as an opportunist, a woman who moved from man to secure wealth and power. Others accused her of lacking original ideas, of being a mirror rather than a light. But these critiques missed the deeper point. Pamela chose to wield the tools available to her in a world where women had few. She understood that power comes in many forms, and she mastered the one open to her. Seduction in its broadest sense, the art of attraction and influence. And unlike others who might have used such gifts solely for personal gain, Pamela channeled them into political structures, into causes, into the Democratic Party, into the careers of men like Clinton. She left a legacy not just of romance, but of real institutional change. The book is filled with vivid anecdotes that illustrate her methods. One guest at her Georgetown dinners recalled that she would meticulously arrange seating charts to ensure conversation flowed, never leaving chance to determine dynamics. Another recounted how she could recall the smallest detail from a conversation months earlier, making people feel uniquely valued. There were stories of her discretion, of how she kept confidences even when pressed, which built trust among men who lived in worlds of betrayal. These details underscore the point that Pamela's influence came not from scheming, but from the consistent application of attention, charm, and discipline. Her life offers lessons beyond biography. Pamela Harriman demonstrates the importance of networks, the value of creating spaces for dialogue, and the power of listening. She shows that influence is not always visible, that those who shape history are not always those whose names appear on ballots. She reminds us that women, often excluded from formal positions of power, found alternative avenues, and that these avenues were no less impactful. Her story also illuminates the 20th century itself. The aristocratic decline of Britain, the wartime crucible, the rise of America as a superpower, the cultural ferment of post-war Europe, and the partisan battles of Washington. Pamela moved through these epochs, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant, her life a thread connecting them. Ogden's biography ultimately portrays her as a master of reinvention. From English girl to Churchill wife, from Parisian courtesan to American political hostess, from widow of a titan to ambassador of a superpower, she consistently adapted to the needs of the moment. Reinvention was her resilience, her way of transforming potential vulnerability into strength. She may not have written laws or commanded armies, but she influenced those who did, and in doing so, carved her own form of power. And that's it. Kingmaker, Pamela Harriman's astonishing life of power, seduction, and intrigue by Sonia Purnell. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.